trying to say? Good evening. Good evening. There you are. Are there any of my Pennsylvania people still here? Give yourself some applause. Thank you for being with us. Are there any of my Xenia people? Xenia, Ohio people here. There you are. Give yourself some applause. Is there anybody here who loves storytelling? Give yourself some applause. I can't tell you how happy I am to be here. I was born in Appalachian, Pennsylvania. Everything was hills and valleys. When I was a little girl, we lived in what was called the Flats. It was a valley. Then eventually, by the time I was almost 6, we moved to what was called the Hill. It wasn't anything wealthy. It wasn't anything grand. It was just the hill. Because everything was hills and valleys. I met my husband there. I had been through a relationship so difficult, I don't like to call it a marriage. I refer to it as a learning experience. But from that came 3 beautiful children. I do not refer to the gentleman as their father. I refer to him as 50% of the necessary genetic material. My husband had been through a difficult experience. And he had 1 child, a boy. And without knowing it, the 2 of us had said the same prayer after we got out of these experiences. Lord, if there's ever going to be anybody else in my life, you're going to have to show them to me, because I am not looking. I went to the children's school. I worked at a preschool with my baby girl on my hip. I studied, took the children to church, to the library, to see their grandmas, and that was pretty much my life, except for shopping at a particular supermarket. But I had said that prayer. My supermarket closed, and I had to find another place to shop. In the meantime, the one who would become my partner for life had said that prayer. And the supermarket that he managed closed down, and he was transferred to the only other supermarket in our area. Now, I was shopping with my sister-in-law. From that first relationship, she is still like a sister to me. And as I was shopping with my baby girl in the shopping cart, her brother's in school, I see a man about my height, cute as he can be, dressed in a crisp shirt and a fine tie. And he smiles at me and he says, "Good morning." And I said, "Good morning." And that's all I said. Saw him a couple aisles from there. He said, "Are you finding everything you need?" And I said, "Yes, I am, thank you." A couple aisles from there he is, and he says to my daughter, "Would you like a cookie?" And she said, yes, sir," because my babies were all polite. Well, he went over to the bakery and he brought her back a gigantic chocolate chip cookie. And every time I shopped there, he would say to my daughter, "Would you like a cookie?" Yes, sir. And after a while, my daughter stopped saying, we go store. She started saying, "We go see Bruce get cookies." Because by that time, she knew his first name. I wouldn't even give him my last name, but she knew his first name. Sometime in that year, I got pneumonia, and my sister-in-law did the shopping for me. And she told me that Bruce kept asking about me. She asked, "Is there anything you'd like to tell him?" I said, no. And finally I could go shopping, but my voice was still in bad shape. It sounded kind of like a frog, or somebody who smoked 24 packs of cigarettes every day. And I wasn't looking particularly cute, because I was tired. I was exhausted. And he came up to me and he said, "Hello." And I said, "Hello." He said, "I haven't seen you for a while." I said, "I've been sick," as if he couldn't tell that. And he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, pulled a pen from his other pocket. He wrote something on the back of the card, and he said, "This is my home phone number. If you or your children ever need anything, you call me." Well, I finally got the nerve to give him my last name. About a year after that, he said, "Merry Christmas." And I said, "Merry Christmas." And he gave me a kiss on the cheek and walked away. And my daughter went crazy. She started calling for her auntie. "Aunt Betty!" My daughter was a little thing with a big mouth. "Aunt Betty! Bruce kissed Mommy!" Well, Pat came from wherever she was in the store. She said, What's wrong?" "Bruce kissed Mommy." And Pat asked, "Where?" Meaning on the cheek or on the lips, because that would be significant. And my daughter said, "Bruce kissed Mommy right in the bread section." Well, people started turning around and looking at me. I think they were trying to figure out where the bread section was. Seemed like there was a run on bread. But now, we've been together a while. Our children were our wedding party. We got married in sweatsuits because they had decided that the reception was going to be playing games like Twister on the floor of our home together. They chose the wedding cake, a sheet cake, marble cake with white icing, on which they placed the bride and groom, Garfield and Arlene the cats. We told our kinfolk what we were doing, that we were getting married, that we were getting married in sweatsuits, that we were getting married the day after Christmas because the house would already be decorated, and that way, no matter how old we got, we would probably remember our anniversary. And some of our family objected. Sweatsuits? In the house the day after Christmas? And Bruce and I told them, it's our day. It's for our children. And if you object, just don't come. And they came. Some in their own sweatsuits and some dressed a little more properly than that. But our wedding party was our children. They stood with us as we got married. And this year, our children will celebrate with us our 37th wedding anniversary. So anyone who's having difficulty finding someone for a relationship should try shopping at Kroger's supermarket. That's where we started, and look for the bread section. Yes. We were trying to trace our family's heritage to build the family tree. And because our family combines the heritage of African Americans and Cherokee and Choctaw, touch of Chickasaw, Scots, Irish, German, French, and English, it's a little bit difficult getting everybody together on that tree. But we were trying. And my daughter and her husband, who is Sicilian American, are trying to do most of that now. I've been a bit busy. My mother needs a bit more help. My husband's having difficulty with his arthritis. That's why he's not here, but he says, hey, y'all. Well, I got a call from a woman who was not kin. She said, I just wanted to tell you about your great-grandfather. I said, what? Your great-grandfather, you know his name? And I'm thinking, what is wrong with this woman? I said, yes, I know his name. She said, well, he's a Bonaparte. I said, he's an Arkward. Well, yes, but he's Jerome Bonaparte Arkward. I said, yes. She said, well, that name, Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte's brother, had property in this country. And part of that property was slaves. And he gave every slave that last name of Bonaparte. So when you meet someone with the name Bonaparte, they're probably related to Napoleon. And I wanted your permission to do some research on your great-grandfather. I asked, is there any money in it? Long pause. Well, no. I said, well, of course, you can do the research. I don't mind that a bit. In fact, I would be grateful. But if you find something out, please make sure you let me know so we can add that information to the family tree. In the meantime, I want you to understand, you can do the research on his name, but I have his stories. And I think that's a little more important. So the next time you call me, please keep in mind, I would love to get acquainted with you because I don't want to consider a stranger a part of the family stories. She said, well, I don't really have time for that. I said, well, I really don't have time to talk to you anymore then. Thank you for your interest. Bye. I haven't heard from that woman since. It's great to do your genealogy, but what are you doing it for? Are you doing it so you can brag? Are you doing it so you can boast? Or are you doing it to give a foundation for the younger ones in your family and to recognize your heritage and share the love of generations of ancestors? I don't think she wanted to know too much more than about my great-grandfather, the name. But had she wanted to get acquainted, I would have taken her to his grave, because I know where it is. And I also know where the family cemetery is, right here in Virginia. But she wasn't interested in that. There's a difference between love for what was perhaps lost and just wanting information. A big difference in that. Your stories are important. Make sure you share them with love and as a foundation for the younger ones, as well as for the heritage and history of this country. Once we share one another's stories, we will all become family, yes? Well, Jerome Bonaparte Arkward was my great-pop. And great-pop, among other things, was a stonemason. I spent my summers in East Liverpool, Ohio, coming down from Appalachian, Pennsylvania. I think my father had arranged that so my mother could have a break, because I was the kind of child that made it necessary for a mama to have a break. That's just who I was. My mother would start to pack my little bag, and she would say, oh, honey, I'm going to miss you so much. But I noticed she was folding and packing things faster and faster. And I would pack my own little bag with coloring books and crayons and dolls and toys. And I'd say, oh, Mommy, I'm going to miss you so much, too. But I was packing kind of quickly because I knew I was the favorite great-grandchild. And I could get away with things down there in East Liverpool that I would never get away with in our home in Pennsylvania. And then we would take the ride down to East Liverpool, Ohio. Now sometimes my great-grandma Essie doll was with us. Great Pops would be waiting at the house in East Liverpool, and Great Grandma would come and visit for a little while, and then she would ride back home. My daddy would do the driving. She would be in the front seat. I would be in the back seat on what I called the throne. It was the armrest in the middle of the seat. And I'd sit there and give the royal wave to nobody. And I'd blow kisses to my mother. No seat belts. If you fell off that throne, you weren't going to get hurt because those cars were built like tanks, you understand? And we'd make our way down to East Liverpool, Ohio. On the way, we would stop at a particular spot to get ice cream, and every time we were going to stop there, my great-grandma would say, "Would you like some ice cream?" As if I'd say no. I'd say, "Yes, ma'am." And when we pull into that parking lot, she would reach somewhere down in here and whip out dollar bills. And that fascinated me. Then she'd pay for our ice cream, and we'd get back in the car and we'd get to East Liverpool, and Great Pop would usually be waiting for us, sitting on the porch swing, just waiting and rocking. And we'd go up the many steps to the front porch. East Liverpool is all hills and valleys. And my father might spend the night and help with some things the next day, but if he had to work, because he worked 2 jobs all the time, he would just leave, give me my hugs and kisses, tell me to behave myself, and make the drive back home. And in the mornings, we'd get up early and work in the garden. There would be coffee before we started to work, just as the sun was rising. My great pop would have a mug of black coffee. My great grandma Essie Doe would have what looked like a teacup filled with coffee and evaporated milk. Do you know how sweet that is? And I would have my coffee, which was actually about 8 ounces of milk with a tablespoon of coffee and some sugar in it. They called it Moffy, make-believe coffee. And then we would work in the garden, and about 10 o'clock, we would have breakfast, what folks call brunch. And so I'm usually not very hungry for breakfast until about 10 o'clock. That stayed. And the memories stayed, even though that entire neighborhood has now disappeared because the highway was built through what used to be that lovely neighborhood. Wow. My great-grandfather built a pond for me, a stone pond, I called it, not the cement pond, the stereotype in the Beverly Hillbillies kind of thing, like there was some lack of knowledge about what a pond would be and what a swimming pool would be. That is so ignorant. He built what we called a stone pond because the walls were made of stone, and the base of it was strong and firm and had great drainage, and he painted it blue so it looked kind of like deep water. But it wasn't that deep. I could stand in it, in my shorts and t-shirt. And I loved to do that. And there were lily pads in there, and the biggest fish I'd ever seen. I called them my goldfish. After a while, I learned they were koi. But they were my goldfish. And Great Pop said to me, "This is yours. You can sit on the wall, you can stick your feet in the water, you can step in there as long as you're careful. But you're going to have to learn how to help clean your pond, too. Do you understand?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "The first thing we're going to have to do to clean the pond is to catch the fish." I said, "Yes, sir." Well, he walked toward the shed, and when he came back with big buckets and his wading boots on and a long pole with a net on one end, he just stopped and looked. Because I had stepped into that water, reached down and scooped up one of those fish. Now, don't ask me how I did it. It never happened again. But I was holding on to that fish for all my life because I was supposed to catch the fish. But that fish was wiggling and squirming, and the tail was slapping me in my face. And I just kept holding on as that fish slapped me with its tail. But I was getting scared, and I called out, "Help! Help!" And my great pop did what any good great grandfather would do. He laughed. And then he said, wait a minute, baby. And he trotted up through the front door and into the house and came back with my great-grandmother, and she was wiping her hands on her apron, and she stopped when she saw me. Oh! I was still crying. Help! Help! And she did what any good great-grandmother would do. She laughed. But then she said, wait a minute, baby. And she went back in the house, and she came out with one of those big old cameras, and, you know, the tripod stand for it. And do you know how long it takes to get those old cameras on a tripod stand and get the lens just the way you want it? I'm standing there, help! Help! And she starts taking pictures. And when she got enough pictures, she said, all right, baby, all right, don't worry. And she took the camera in the house, and my great-pop walked over to our pond and gave me a bit of great wisdom, something I had not considered. He said, Lenny Jean, let go. So I let go. And the fish dropped in the water, but by that time, I was emotionally disturbed. Well, he took me out of that water. I was soaking wet from head to toe from the fish splash and not from falling in the water. I hadn't fallen, and he set me down on the stone wall. And as he was showing me how to scoop the koi out and put them into buckets of water, he started telling me a story. Had nothing to do with what I'd just done, but it had a fish in it, so I guess he figured that was the one to tell. He said that there was an old man lived with his good wife in a house on the hill. Little house, and it was Sunday morning, and that old woman was getting ready for church. She had on her Sunday go-to-meeting dress and her Sunday go-to-meeting shoes, and she was putting on her Sunday go-to-meeting hat, and she had her big Sunday go-to-meeting purse, and she was getting ready to put on her Sunday go-to-meeting gloves when that old man walked out the bedroom, and he was dressed in a pair of coveralls, blue denim. And he walked over to the wall, and he pulled off his straw hat, pulled it down on his head, and reached out for his fishing pole. And the old woman asked him, what are you doing? It's Sunday. Supposed to go to church. He said, I'm not going to church. I'm going fishing. She said, but it's Sunday. You're supposed to go to church. He said, I'm not going to church. I'm going to fishing. The old woman said, the Lord wants to see you. He said, well, if the Lord wants to see me, he can go down to the creek, because that's where I'm going to be, because I'm not going to church. She got so upset. She balled up her fists. She didn't know what to say. She said, you shouldn't be worried about fishing. You should be worried about going to church. God wants to see you in church. No fishing on Sunday. But when he ignored her, she pulled those gloves on, put that purse over her arm, went out the door and headed to church. Well, that old man walked out the back door with his fishing pole. No bait, because there was no hook on the line. Because he wasn't worried about catching fish. He was worried about catching a net with nobody bothering him. And he walked down the path toward the creek. And when he got there, that willow tree's branches were hanging so nice and low, he figured that he would sit down underneath that tree, slide underneath those branches, lean his back against that tree, pull down that hat, take that nap. But before he did that, he made sure as he sat that he braced the fishing pole between his knees with the line in the water so it would look like he was fishing if anybody came along. And then he leaned on back, ready to go to sleep, when he felt a tug on the line. He had caught something. No bait, no hook, but there was something tugging on the line. Well, you don't just let something go. So he started pulling back, trying to catch whatever it was. pulling back. Ooh, it felt like a big one. Pulling on back, and up out of the water came the biggest fish he had ever seen in his life. It was walking out of the water on its tail, with the fishing line underneath one flipper. Sorry about that, flipped too hard. And it walked up and looked at him with one eye. And the old man said, "You're the biggest fish I've ever seen in my life. What am I supposed to do with you?" The fish said, "Bloop, take me home." Well, the old man didn't know what else to do. So he started walking home with the pole over one shoulder, the line underneath that fish's flipper, the fish walking along on its tail, looking at him with one eye. Got to the house and the old man thought about what was happening. He said, this is where I live, but I don't know what to do next. The fish said, "Bloop, cook me up." Old man said, "What?" "Cook me up." Well, the old man just stood there. So the fish let go of the line, shoved the man through the door, made him sit down at the table, and then the fish kind of perused the situation in that little kitchen. He saw a big cast iron skillet still warm on the cook stove, and there was a bit of fatback on a plate, and that fish flipped the fatback into the skillet and shook it around until it started greasing that skillet. Ooh, smelled so good. Fish looked around a little bit more, saw a pack of flour sitting there, flipped that flour up in the air. It broke on the countertop. Saw a pack of cornmeal, flipped that too. It broke on top of the flour, and the fish mixed that all up with his flippers. He saw a salt shaker and a pepper shaker, flipped them in the air. The pepper and salt landed with the cornmeal and the flour. He mixed all that up, did a triple somersault into the air, landed in that mixture, and floured himself up. And when he got himself all covered on one side, flipped himself over, covered up the other side. Then he did a triple somersault into that skillet, landed in that skillet and started sizzling. And the old man just sat there. He didn't know what to do. When the fish was nice and brown on one side, he flipped himself over onto the other side. Brown that side, nice and crisp, and everything was smelling good. And when he was done, he did another triple somersault and landed on the table. Bloop. And the old man just looked at him. "What you think I'm going to do?" Fish said. "Bloop, eat me up." Fish said, man said, Fish slid off that table, went over to the cupboards, found a plate, flipped it on the table, saw a drawer and dragged it open and flipped out a fork and a knife. They landed bing, bing on either side of the plate. He saw some cloth napkins folded, unfolded one of them, tied it around that old man's neck, did another triple somersault, landed on the plate, said, "Bloop, I said, eat me up." Now the man sat there saying, "I don't think that's a good idea. I ain't never seen a talking fish before. I don't know if I want to eat you. I just don't know." And while he was saying all those eyes, that fish jumped in the air into his open mouth, slid down his throat and into his belly. And that old man sat there. He could feel that fish roll into one side and roll into the other side and slapping up against his spine and knocking up against the inside of his belly button. Oh, this don't feel right. I need to figure out what to do. What am I going to do now? And inside his belly, the fish said, "Bloop, go back to the creek." Well, the man didn't know what else to do, so he got up and he walked out the back door, started heading toward the creek, but every time he took a step, that fish rolled around in his belly, slapped up against his spine, knocked up against the inside of his belly button. Oh, by the time he got to that willow tree, he was feeling mighty poorly. He lay down on the ground underneath the willow tree and he said, oh, this is terrible. What am died. Up out of his stomach, out of his throat, out of his mouth came that fish. And it looked at him with one eye, and then the other. And it said, "Blue, what you gonna do? Go to church." Then that fish walked back into the water and disappeared. That man jumped up, ran all the way home. He got himself cleaned up, put on his best Sunday shirt, his Sunday suit, his clean socks, his shiny shoes, even put on his hat. Took that straw hat and threw it on the floor. And then he ran all the way to church with his Bible in one hand and the family hymnal in the other hand. And when he got to church, he saw his good wife sitting in one of the pews. He walked in quietly and sat down beside her. And she looked at him and said, "What you doing here? I thought you were going fishing." He said, no fishing on Sunday." And that was the end of the story that my great-grandfather told me when I had caught that big fish. He told a lot of different stories, and he taught me about tracking in the woods. He taught me that instead of walking heel-toe the way most folks do, in the woods you walk toe-heel, toe-heel. Try it sometime. It doesn't make as much sound. And he would leave me standing in the woods, sometimes sitting on a stump. I can remember this old rotting stump. What was he doing? He was teaching me how to track by following him, but he was also teaching me to attentively listen because I'm partially deaf in my right ear, which means I'm also partially hearing, just depends on your attitude about the whole thing. And I would listen and I'd hear a sound. I'd have to figure out if it was a squirrel, if it might be a bird, what might it be, and I'd walk in that direction. I might hear a rustling sound, and I'd have to figure out, was it some animal moving through the branches and the brush, or was it my great pop? And finally, I would see perhaps a stone turned upside down so that the dirt was on top, or maybe a mark on the side of a tree, and I would walk in that direction until I'd see my great pop. And he would just be standing there. He wouldn't say, "Good job." He wouldn't say, "Oh, wonderful." He'd just nod, take my hand and walk me back home. Well, after a while, I got tired of that game. On Sundays, after church was done, if I didn't have to help my great-grandmother with anything for supper, if the preacher wasn't coming, something like that, I'd get into my play clothes and go into the woods with him, but I didn't want to play the game the way he did it. And so he would make some kind of sound and I would yell, "No!" and run in another direction. And then I'd hear another sound and I'd giggle, "No!" and I'd run in another direction. My great-grandfather would walk up behind me without me ever hearing a step. He'd grab me by the back of my shirt, lift me up from wherever I was sitting, glare at me, take my hand, walk me back home. The game was over. And no matter how many times I tried, running and laughing, no, he always found me. And finally I had enough sense to ask him, "Great Pop, how come every time I hide in the woods, how come you find me?" And he gave me a bit of wisdom that I'm going to pass on to you now. There's nothing in the woods that giggles. He was a very wise man, and I truly missed him. My great-grandmother, I knew I was her favorite. And she decided one time that she was going to get me a new dress for church. I didn't like dresses. That should be obvious. But she took me down to the ladies' store. I hated the ladies' store. White walls and pink lacy curtains and lacy white curtains and all kinds of pink this and pink that, and she bought me a pink dress. But I was so skinny that when she had that dress put on me and the satin ribbon tied in the back, it just kind of hung there. So she got 3 crinoline slips. The crinkly kind that make a dress stick out. Well, it took 3 to make the dress stick out properly for me. But I was so skinny that now I look like an open umbrella with 2 skinny umbrella handles hanging out underneath it. She bought a pair of white socks with lace around the edges, and now I knew my ankles were going to itch. And she bought a pair of white lacy underpants for me to match those socks, and now I knew I was going to itch in a place I was not allowed to scratch in church. And she bought me a pair of black patent leather shoes, and that's when I started to cry, because my older cousins had told me never wear black patent leather shoes with a wide skirt, because the boys can look down at your feet and see right up underneath your dress. And I didn't know they were joking. I thought it was true. And I didn't want that to happen. But my great-grandma bought me a pair of white gloves like hers, and a little black patent leather purse like hers. And I felt better until she bought the 2 pink ribbons, and I knew she was going to braid my hair so tightly I wouldn't be able to blink. All of that was put into a big silver gray box, tied with a gray ribbon, and I carried home the paraphernalia of my doom. Sunday morning came. My great-grandfather was already dressed, standing out on the front porch. My great-grandmother was in the dining room, holding on to that pink dress, chasing me around the dining room table, trying to get me into it, as I said an ornery child's favorite word, "No!" and just kept on running around that table. And she was chasing me, "Baby, baby, baby, baby." And she stopped on one side of the table and I stopped on the other side. And she said, "Baby, if you let me get you into this dress, I'll let you put the big money in the church plate." The dollar bills? Not the pennies and the nickels, the dollar bills. Just let me get you into this dress. Well, finally I was dressed, and there I was, open umbrella, little skinny legs, scratchy socks, place I wasn't allowed to scratch, shiny shoes, eyes wide open, the ribbons around my braids. And she said, "Oh, you look so cute. You go on up and you get great-grandma's big money." Well, she went on out on the front porch with my great-pop. And when I came out the door, she just reached down for my hand, and we walked down the many, many steps down to the street to walk the 3 blocks to church. And as we walked along, people in cars going to their own churches were smiling and waving, and great-grandma smiled back, thinking that they were looking at her beautiful family. And she smiled down at me as I smiled up at her. And that's when she realized I was walking to church, swinging one of her big old white bras on my arm. Because I thought that was where the big money came from. My great-grandma gasped. My great-pop got as close to any kind of cussing as he ever did. "Oh, Lord!" My great-grandma snatched that bra, swung me around, and we walked back home. She took the purse upstairs. She came down with a little white cloth bag with a safety pin on top. That's where the big money came from. And she opened it up, and she took out some dollar bills and stuffed them into my little black patent leather purse. And then we walked the 3 blocks to church again. That's the only time my great-grandparents were ever late for church. And my great-grandmother never told anybody why. But I just told you. As you can tell, they were 2 of my favorite people. When I was 10 years old, my great-pop was dying. And in those days, a child could not visit in the hospital. The number of people who could visit would be limited. He had cancer. And I could feel that something was wrong and that he wasn't going to be around, but I didn't know what was going on. I was standing in the parking lot because I wasn't allowed to go into the hospital. Standing in the parking lot with my father. And he told me, look up there, look up there. And there was my great-grandfather, very thin, very frail. He had made his way to his hospital room window, and he was standing there and smiling and waving at me. And I smiled and waved back, but I knew that we were waving goodbye. When he died, many, many people came to that little house in East Liverpool, Ohio. They filled the front porch, they filled the back porch, they were all over the house, all kinds of noise. And nobody would let my great-grandmother do any of the cooking. Everything was prepared. People brought food and put it on the dining room table. She needed to do some cooking. That was her comfort zone. It has become my comfort zone too. But they told her, you just sit and rest. And she didn't want to rest. She wanted to do something, and they wouldn't let her. And after a while, people started to leave, and they told her, we'll be back to check on you. And I heard her say under her breath, bless you. Well, you know, some folks say, well, bless your little heart. My great-grandmother would say, bless you. Even when somebody was acting up, being unkind, she would smile and say, bless you. But she explained to me that bless you, well, the rest of it was, bless you with what you truly deserve. And she was saying to some of those folks as they left, bless you. Bless you. And when they had left, I'm not sure where my parents were, I'm not sure where my grandparents were, but I was in the living room with my great-grandmother. She was sitting in my great-pop's chair with her dark hands on the arms of the chair. And I was sitting next to her, my head resting on her knee, my hand on her soft hand, wrinkled like a leaf. Everything was quiet and peaceful. And my great-grandmother told me the only story that she ever told me that did not come from the Bible. She said once, Death was walking through the woods. He was carrying his bow with his arrows in the quiver. He made his way through the woods, and the rain started pouring down, and Death was looking for a place to get out of the rain when he saw a cave, and he ran into the cave and bumped into somebody there. That somebody was Love. And Love had come into the cave for the same reason, to get out of the storm. But when they bumped into one another, they dropped their bows, they dropped their quivers, and all the arrows fell out and kind of got mixed up. So when the storm stopped and they started picking up those arrows, Death got some of Love's arrows, and Love got some of Death's arrows. And that's why sometimes when you fall in love, it feels as painful as a death. And sometimes when good folks die, they feel a peace like love. And then she started to cry a little bit. And it's the only time I saw her cry. But I love what she said so much that I put it into one of my books to honor her. And to honor my family. And to honor the foundations of my stories. You may not know all of your family's history, but whatever stories you have, share them with others. Make the world one family. And thank you so much for listening to a bit of my story.